All right, welcome to today's talk. Today we're going to have a quick discussion on training age. I'm going to define what training age is. We're going to talk about why training age is important, some kind of ideas of how to apply training age to clients or for yourself if you're just a fitness enthusiast. And then we're going to wrap it up with some cautions about training age because there are some things to consider about this. So, getting into it, training age is very simply how long a trainee has been doing resistance training. And for today's talk, I'm mostly just going to be talking about resistance training. I'm not going to get into other disciplines. So, for someone who's never done any resistance training and they're just getting started, their training age is 0. Okay. If they've been lifting for 1 year, their training age is 1. If they've been lifting for 15 years, their training age is 15. So that's basically what that means. And it has a direct impact on the type of training that's appropriate for them and what they're going to respond to. So why is training age important? It's important because it has a direct impact on the intensity, the volume, and the goals of the trainee. Let's take a look at goals. So if we have someone whose training age is 0, most likely their goals are not very specific. They might seem specific in a way, but it's not going to be the same as someone who's been lifting for 6 years or 10 years or 15 years. Or for someone who is, if we take that to an athletic kind of view, if I'm dealing with a middle school athlete, even if they have real specific goals, like they know they want to play a certain sport in college or at the professional level, at that training age, their goals should be pretty broad and pretty general because they're still building their base. Whereas once they get to a high school level and certainly a college level, things should be a lot more focused and a lot more specific. Also, if we're dealing with a novice, the intensity is going to be very low. The volume is going to be very low because we're building their base. They're going to respond really well to very simple programming. We don't need to get very complicated. Once they have that base built, they've got 2 or 3 years under their belt, and they've gotten good at some basic lifts. In order for them to see more progress, we're going to need to be able to increase the intensity. We're going to need to be able to increase the volume, and we want to get more specific about their goals. For a lot of trainees, especially when we're looking at the general public, the goal is just to be in shape. And that is very subjective, it's very broad, it's incredibly nonspecific. It's not a bad place for someone to start the process if they're just starting the process, but as they go, we need to help them dial that in and get more specific about what that means to them. Because if they're interested in kayaking, being in shape means something much different than if they hate being outside, okay? Or if they just want to look good in the mirror. Even though there's some overlap, it's still, the differences are important. Now, what are some of the ways to apply training age? I've already kind of touched on this, but when we've got someone who's brand new, they're starting out, their training age is 0, they're going to respond really well to low volume and low intensity. Now, when I say intensity, I'm talking about percentage of load. So I'm talking about like 10 to 12 reps, maybe 12 to 15 reps, as opposed to 3 to 5 reps. That would be a higher intensity. I'm not just talking about perception of effort. For both categories, for the novice and for the intermediate and for the advanced trainee, their perception of the workout is going to be similar. They're going to feel like it's challenging. It's going to be appropriate for them. But from just a kind of a practical standpoint, for the novice, the intensity is going to be less, the volume is going to be less. So when I say that for intermediate and advanced trainees, the training should be more specific, what do I mean by that? Let's take an example of someone who is sprinting and they want to take, let's say we've got two different high school athletes, okay? One of them wants to compete in wrestling and they want to take that as far as they can, whether that just means through college or maybe they want to, take that to a professional level. We have another trainee who is a sprinter and they want to take that to at least to college and perhaps to the professional level. Those are very different goals. They have a lot of different requirements, but one of the things, just to keep this conversation simple, is the person who wants to compete in the grappling sport, they resist force in a lot of different directions. So they're going to require more variety in their training, especially for their upper body. The trainee who's sprinting, they're doing something really specific and they are they're not resisting force in as many directions, so they're not going to require nearly as much training variety. Their volume needs are going to be different as well, and that's going to depend a little bit on the level they're at and what sport they're in. I don't want to get too specific about nuances today. I'll give one more example about that with the grappler and the sprinter. Someone in a grappling sport is going to need good grip strength. So it will make sense at a certain point in their training to specialize on grip strength and to look at different types of grip and different ways you can improve that. And here's a free tip if you don't know, you've got your pinch grip, you've got your closed fist, and you've got your hook grip. Those are all different, and just because you're good at one doesn't mean you're good at the other two. They need to be trained individually, and it just depends on how it's going to be applied. If you've got someone who's wrestling in a gi or something like judo, they probably need to be able both that kind of thumbless grip and the closed fist. There's a chance that a sprinter is going to have a strong grip as a byproduct of their training, but they probably don't need to do any kind of grip specialization phase. If their training is good and they're doing good things like deadlifts and maybe farmer's walks, they're probably going to have a pretty solid grip. We used to test people with a dynamometer at a place I used to manage, and so I know that a lot of sprinters have really strong grips, but they don't require a grip specialization part of their training. Whereas if you've got someone who's in a grappling sport or even someone who's in law enforcement, they probably do need to dedicate some training time to their grip. Now we're going to wrap up with some cautions of understanding training age. One thing that I have learned the hard way is a lot of trainees tend to exaggerate their history, whether they know they're doing it or not. This comes in a couple different ways. One way is I think a lot of people, I've seen this a lot of people unintentionally sort of overestimate their fitness level. I've seen people who thought they were single digit body fat who were 20% body fat. You've probably seen that too. And I think sometimes when a trainee is talking to a new coach or a new trainer and they're talking about the whole thing and they're excited, sometimes their perception of the shape they were in is not accurate. We have to be cautious about that because we don't want to give someone a stimulus that's too challenging. It's much better, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be challenging, it should be, but it needs to be appropriate. It's much better to start someone off a little bit easy and to ramp it up. That is much better on every level than to start someone too hard and have to back off. That is pretty much nothing good will come out of that. It's not good for them. It's not good for your business. And it can take a little bit with a new trainee to figure out where they're at and what they need. That's fine. Don't feel like you have to impress them by blowing them out the first workout. That is not good. Don't do that. This is one thing where if you're training people in person, it's much better to do some kind of assessment to figure out where they're at, and it should be the same assessment you apply to everyone so that you have a baseline, and then to give you an idea of what kind of training they're going to respond to. If you start people with just a workout, I think that can backfire. So if you don't have some kind of assessment protocol that you do, I would get online, find one, figure it out. There's a lot of different ways you can approach that, but figure out where they're at before you start training them. The last point I want to make is be mindful that starting over is hard. So if someone has been in good shape where they feel like they've been in good shape, Tudor Bompa tells us that an elite athlete will become deconditioned within 3 days. So if someone was in very good shape and they happen to take a month off or a year off or 3 years off, there's a lot of different reasons why this happens. Starting over isn't just physically hard, it's psychologically hard. It can even be emotionally challenging. So you need to be mindful of that. And if you're on the other end of this, if you're a trainee, you need to be patient with yourself if you're starting over. Starting over sucks, especially if you've been in really good shape. But the good thing is, if you have hit a good peak in the past, it will not take you that long to get back where you were. You just have to be patient with it and work through that suck. And how long that suck lasts is really going to depend on you and your background, and there's too many variables to get into. It could take weeks. It could take potentially longer depending on why you took a break and what you were dealing with. So just understand that if the client, if they do have a background, one of the benefits to that, even if their training age has reverted to zero, they're still going to have a better nervous system than someone who is middle-aged and has never exercised and they're starting fresh. That's something I probably should have talked about earlier, but if you have a trainee who's in their 40s or maybe their 50s and they've never really done any resistance training, they require patience because they probably don't have a good nervous system. You don't, and it's easy to blow them out. You need to be patient with them, introduce them to things, focus on basics. Don't try to impress them with real complicated things. Okay, I could talk about this for weeks, but attention spans are a real thing. So, understand what training age is, figure out the best way to apply it to yourself and to your clients. Little things that up.